Everything you need to know about products and services that can improve your life. This is Experts on Call on CL 650.
And welcome back to the show. This is Experts on Call on CL 650. I'm Joanne Sutton, and joined in the studio today, we're talking about insurance with our experts from Intact Insurance. Patrick Magnuson is here, Keith Story is here, and Andrew Tablotny of Laguerre Pelling Insurance. So we're talking about buying insurance when you live in a condominium and some of the differences versus owning a home and some of the challenges should a serious event occur and maybe you can't live in the building for some time. So when does your personal insurance take over versus the building's coverage? Who can start that conversation?
That's the million-dollar question, and that's been a real issue in the last 4 to 5 years. The Strata Act was changed, and it clearly defined where your responsibilities start. But it's been a long, arduous process to try and get people to understand that, and insurance companies, even adjusters. There's been arguments over the last few years as to where does your responsibility of the actual individual unit owner work. And the definition is 6 inches inside the wall and the ceilings and the floors is your responsibility. So if something happens in there, even though it's out of your care and custody, you're still responsible for it. So the Strata pays for ensuing damage elsewhere, but again, that's why you need to make sure you've got coverage. So if a pipe bursts in the wall and the Strata has a $25,000 deductible, they're going to come knocking on your door saying, please pay the $25,000. We'll pay for the damage, but you're going to pay for the deductible.
Didn't you actually have an example of that with a woman? You were just telling us a little bit story off mic about.
Well, it was more of a case of why you should have insurance, because she had a situation where the water was leaking and they couldn't figure out where it was. It was coming up through her floors, and they had to rip up the floors and they punched holes in the walls. And the Strata turned around and said, "Well, we think it's your fault and it's from your unit. You're going to have to pay." And fortunately, she had insurance. I think it's actually through Intact, and they were able to come in and do the repairs and try and determine where the loss is. So that's why you want to have an insurance policy, because they're kind of like a lawyer for you. They represent your interests, and if there's something going on, they're there to try and find out what it is and make sure that you're properly represented in terms of whose allocation of the loss goes to.
Well, that sounds like a good analogy, actually, as a lawyer, that you're trying to look after me. But it sounds like the client who's had the flood or the damage or the unforeseen accident in their condominium could actually feel like they're stuck in the middle between their own personal policy and the building's policy. Who gets to help them out?
Well, in a situation where, again, if we use the water example, the loss has taken place. Several units are affected. Yours is one of them. Your insurance adjuster for your condominium policy will come in. The Strata will have reported to the Strata's insurance policy company. They'll have an adjuster involved. If your contents in your unit are affected, your insurance company will respond to those. If you can't stay in your unit, then your insurance company will address your additional living expenses. If you have unit improvements and betterments, the hardwood floor is an example versus carpet, what will happen is the adjusters will work together, determine who's going to be responsible for what portions, and address it that way. At the end of the day, the customer will be returned back to where they were with what they had.
And to make it more fun, if there's a renter in there, then there may even be a third adjuster involved in there for their contents.
Didn't even consider that.
Right.
This is true. You may, as the owner, you may not be the one that's living in that suite, right?
As a broker, we tend to have to be involved more often than not with condo claims, because there is some, there's always dispute over which, who's actually on the hook for the particular damages. It's less clear cut than on a home policy. You got a home policy and something's there. If it's covered, it's covered. As opposed to a condo policy is, how many inches was for the wall? Was it at the joint of the pipe, and et cetera, et cetera. So it gets very, very complex, and it can sometimes drag things out a little bit longer than you might want it to think it should.
Sure, everybody gets out with their rulers and their measuring tapes, trying to figure out who owns that little corner of the building where the problem was.
Exactly.
But certainly, that's one of the advantages of having the insurance policy, is you can sort of let the adjusters duke it out. You don't have to worry about that. I mean, that's certainly an added stress or an added complication that you as a unit owner don't need to be involved in that.
No, because you've got all the stresses of trying to keep your life in order after having an incident happen in your suite.
Exactly. I mean, having a claim is a stressful time in your life, and to be able to remove that burden is a huge advantage.
So I know that water is one of the most common claims, or water damage would be the most common claim. What are some of the other common claims that you see in condominiums?
Well, fire. A fire would be a big one.
Sure.
That one has the damages are significant. Generally going to be a fairly lengthy restoration period. I've seen in my own experience, just carpet damage claims within a unit, theft claims.
Theft, yeah, break and enter, or
to build on the fire one. I mean, I used to live in a condo when I lived in Calgary, and I remember it was during one of the very few Calgary Flames Stanley Cup runs, and somebody must have been up having a good evening during one of the games, and they put their cigarette out in the peat moss planter. And of course, a couple hours later, that started a fire.
It smoldered.
Yeah,
and,
smoldered and started a fire. So, the fire damage itself wasn't particularly large, but the sprinkler damage, the water damage from the sprinklers that went down through that whole side of the building was significant. And that's what caused the vast majority of the damage for that side of the house, or that side of the building, rather.
And then we go back to the earlier conversation about if you don't have the right policy, you can be on the hook for some of the damage in the building that may not even be your suite.
That's right, or the deductible, rather.
Yeah. And to that as well, if you don't have a condominium policy, if you don't have coverage, and a major event like that happens and your unit's affected, you'll be responsible for your own contents. You'll be responsible for your own improvements and betterments, and you're responsible for finding yourself alternate accommodations while the restoration period goes on.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Let's talk a little bit about prevention then. How can we prevent some of these common claims and just make it a safer environment for us?
Well, one of the as I said, the key things is water, and checking all of your taps, making it a regular routine that you're checking your taps, you're checking your water lines, the washer, using steel braided lines, replacing the old ones, checking your hot water tank. Is it functioning properly, or having it regularly maintained,
or replacing it after 10 years.
Or replacing
it.
They're only good for 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And also knowing where your main water shutoff is.
This is a good point, because if you own a home and you go on a holiday, you turn off your main water source, right? Mm-hmm. Would you do the same in a condominium?
No.
You would if you had access to it.
Yes.
I mean, that's the other part, is if you don't have a shutoff in your unit, you need to know where your shutoff is.
It's more of a case where if there is a claim, if a pipe bursts, you need to either know who to get a hold of, or know where to access it, so that you can get that water shut off, so that it isn't running down through multiple units and causing significant damage.
Huh.
Interesting. A couple of years ago, my wife was in the laundry room actually doing laundry, and that's where our hot water tank is located. And she heard a pop, and she looked over, and there's water shooting out of the top of the hot water tank. Out of the hot water, which I found was really interesting, but out of the hot top of it, and she knew exactly where the shutoff was, and was able to turn it off with maybe a half a gallon of water on the floor.
Geez, I think that we move into a condominium, we take a lot of things for granted.
Yeah.
How do deductibles actually apply to water claims? And we didn't even mention earthquake claims about living in a condominium. Andrew, do you want to touch base on that?
Well, I don't want to be Mr. Doom and Gloom, which I have been on some of the other episodes we've had. But
no, it's all informative and educational.
The problem is, on your standard policy, you've got a $500 or $1,000 deductible, and for your strata deductible, it's depending on what your strata has, could be anywhere from 5 to on average 5, 10, or maybe 25,000. They may have purchased a higher deductible just to save costs. The problem we've got, and we talked about this on the previous show, is that lots of people think we're going to have an earthquake in the next 50 years. They just think it's going to be 50 years out, so they're not worrying about earthquake coverage. And the condominium policies all provide a limited amount of coverage for earthquake deductible, meaning usually $1,000 or $2,500. Intact for $10 will allow you to increase that to $25,000. The problem is, if you take a lot of property managers are now handing out the actual strata policy and saying, here's what you've got. You talk to your broker, and I've been getting that on a regular basis. So what I do is look at the amount of the building value. I ask how many units are in the suite, and just to come up with a rough figure what it is. And you take that earthquake deductible and divide it among those 200 unit owners, and invariably it's coming in at 20, 30, 40. I've had even some at $70,000. Well, people aren't aware that they're on the hook for that $70,000 in the event of an earthquake. And
we're not talking the big earthquake either. It could just be a small shaker that does a little bit of, a little bit of damage to the building.
But the problem is that the insurance company is not going to turn one shovel. They're not going to do one stick of work until the entire deductibles is to be available to be paid. And if 50% of the people don't buy any insurance, they aren't going to have any coverage of any sort.
What were the stats again on condominium owners that buy insurance?
Less than 50%, around 45%.
Yeah, I think we know that in the Lower Mainland, about 55 to 65% of people who buy insurance have earthquake insurance. Maybe it's a little bit higher in some areas, but it's still a stat that is a little too low. And particularly when you look at what earthquake insurance costs on a condo policy, it's not that much.
I would say most people, if they buy a condo policy, most people buy earthquake coverage on their condo. The problem is that you're talking less than half the people that own a condo unit actually buy a policy period.
You're listening to Experts on Call on CIAL 650. I'm Joanne Sutton, and joining us in the studio today are the insurance experts from Intact Insurance. We have Patrick Magnuson and Keith Story, along with Andrew Tablotny of Laguerre Pelling Insurance. If you want more information on their products and services, please visit the website, intact.ca. And don't go away. There's a lot more information to come about tips on what you need to know about owning a condo and buying insurance for it. We'll be right back on CIAL 650.
This is Experts on Call on CIAL 650.